I'm excited to get to read how other folks are engaging work and thinking about organizing community and building spaces and navigating um, the nuance and the contradictions and thinking about how do we build the world that we want to live in. I feel like so many books that I get to read on praxis are always devoid of the stories of the people who are actually engaging in the work. And I love that it's folks who I feel like I connect with, people with intersectional identities, people in communities like the ones we're in here. And so, first off, I just want to say thank you for engaging and writing and doing something that uplifts and amplifies the words and the work of people on the front lines. I think that's really powerful. And I know you've been asked a million times, why did you write the book? So I'm not going to ask that. What I actually want to know is what makes you excited about this book now being in the world?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, first of all. And thank you for sitting down with me and talking with me for the book, because you were definitely one of the first people I thought of when trying to think of who I wanted to talk to. And, um, I know the generosity of that, to take that time. And, I think what makes me excited, one, is like you said, I think every time that, we had this kind of cycle of strife where things are in a news cycle, people want to invent a new way of getting out in the world, and people are like, what if I did this? Or people are just completely frozen, right? And the idea that people have been doing this work, and that what you see in the headlines, even when we're making progress, is the culmination of years of labor that often is unappreciated, unseen, unsupported. I really wanted to bring that to people because it's such a beautiful story. And so, first and foremost, it's been so exciting to watch people, who are profiled in the book, like, see themselves seen, and like getting messages from people saying, like, I've never really felt seen in the work I've done until this year. And so seeing that pride and excitement, but then watching community members get excited. So getting, like, I get messages or people will tag me and saying, this is in my town. I had no idea this is happening in my town, and I'm so excited to find it and support it. And so that's been really fun. People supporting the businesses that are featured, people supporting the orgs that are featured, going out and meeting people, going to meetings. Like, it's been very, very exciting in that sense. And also hearing from people saying, oh, I've reached out to this org because I've been trying to do something similar in my city. And, they've been willing to sit with me because, I'm going to move this earring. This earring is going to be a problem. We never account for how much I gesticulate. All right. One sec,
Also,
y'all.
earrings are just like an important part of the fit.
They are. I'm really upset about this.
I think you could start a
All right.
trend though. It could be a
Right.
one earring thing.
All right. Y'all saw it and appreciated it.
No one take pictures of the left side
Yeah.
of the face.
No photos until I can put that back. Yeah, and so, watching that and watching people, sparks fly. Even just, I got actually a DM today from a lovely person who was a fan of my work, who had sent me a bunch of chili peppers that he grew.
Nice.
And they're amazing, and the spiciest peppers I've ever had in my life. And I actually just used them last night to make some pepper soup for a neighbor who had surgery. And he reached out and he just said, by the way, I've been trying to start my pepper business, and then I read your chapter on business and realized I could make an abolitionist pepper business. And I was like, this is amazing.
Burn it down.
Exactly.
With peppers.
Exactly.
I'm here for it. Let's go.
Trademark that one right there. Like, that's amazing.
I'm ready.
So yeah, that's been really fun to watch where people go with it. I wasn't expecting to get a DM saying I'm going to start an abolitionist pepper business, but I'm all for it.
Yeah, it feels like it's meant to be.
Right.
There's like so many different types of stories and so many different people doing work. How did you decide what stories to tell? I can't imagine like even how you decided what not to include, because just our conversation alone was probably an hour and 15 minutes, and I talk fast, so there's a lot of words.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the conversations I had, the reams of paper of transcripts from the conversations was huge. And it was really difficult to actually really narrow it down. It was sort of an organic process. I had some people I knew right away I wanted to talk with, but then I always tried to ask people, like, who would you like to see? Who's inspiring you? And that introduced me to a lot of different people. My research process is, while I have ADHD and I'm always trying to work with that in my writing. And so I really do have like a funnel process, because I've learned if I try to constrain all of the avenues my brain wants to go into, I'm doomed from the start. And so my research is like, let me spend months researching everything. So I have like a full drawer filled with hundreds and hundreds of articles on every possible topic that intersects with race.
Here for
And
it.
yeah, and do that. And then it's like searching for story, and then trying to find the themes in the conversations. So the hard part really for me was realizing like I couldn't go down every avenue I wanted to. Otherwise the book was going to be like 500, 600 pages long, and people don't read books that long these days.
So
People,
we're ready for part 2 then.
yeah.
What you're telling us.
And there was a whole chapter I had to cut in the end, which was really, tough. But I don't know, the internet, like it's really hard when you get to a certain page count. People just aren't gonna, they'll pretend to read it if you're an Obama, but I didn't read it either. It's too long. But like after a while, you have to have it there. So that was, for me, it was once I started interviewing people and I started looking at themes. And so I learned early on I couldn't write the book until I was done talking with everyone. And so once I started to find themes around things, it helped shape where the chapters were going to be, and then where I needed to talk with more people, where I didn't, where I couldn't. And a lot of this book was really shaped by what people were telling me. And so the themes ended up being a lot broader than I thought. I really had real specifics I was digging into in my research. And then what I realized is, no one works in one field. Like if, people were to say you're a lawyer, like people have an idea of what a lawyer is or does, right? But when it comes to the work you do, it's so broad, and you could go into
a million areas.
Exactly. And so that was really where, it ended up being like, okay, does this fit in this overall theme, this picture that's emerging in these segments of society?
Which I love because, when I think about abolition, we tend to talk about prisons and police, but abolition is environmental justice, it's climate justice, it's economic justice, it's food justice, it's housing justice. There's so many things that go into building a world beyond carceral systems. And I listened to your book. I tried to read it. I have what do you call it, dyslexia? So I'll be trying to read a book and I get lost. So I was like, let me listen to Ijeoma's wonderful voice. I did put it at 2 times the speed. It's the trick, y'all. But what really stuck with me is just like how the solution to the problems that we as abolitionists are digging through they are broad, they are expansive, they are multifaceted, they are not one size fits all. When you're thinking about and talking about abolition, and you probably inevitably get the answer in spaces, it's like, well, what do we do about insert whatever crime they want to give? How do you talk about abolition now, having had so many robust conversations with people that are approaching it from so many different angles?
That's a great question. And yeah, that kind of fear-mongering of we don't want to take this step until we know exactly how it's going to work out. One, my standard is to actually look at what happens, right? So people are like, what are you going to do if a murderer comes to your house? You're going to get murdered, just like you would now. A cop is not actually going to magically show up at the same time as the murderer and stop that from happening.
This is true.
Cops respond to crime if they do, at most.
Not in this city.
Right. And when they don't feel like it, when they want to prove a point of some sort, they won't at all. Or if they don't like the neighborhood or the people,
Long list.
Yeah, it's a long list of reasons. But at best, police officers will respond to a crime after it's already happened. But these worst case scenarios that are informed by like these TV shows of like a cop bursting in to say, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. And so recognizing that, the reality of that, is as scary as that is, like we already have a reality right now where we don't actually have an effective entity that prevents crime from happening. And actually what abolition aims to do is to look at the societal issues that cause, like it's the only thing looking at cause and saying, let's address this. But it's also, abolition is not, the concept of freedom, like our focus is often on policing because it is the strongest, most direct continuation of chattel slavery. But freedom in itself doesn't just end at, I don't want to be killed by a police officer or locked away. The idea of liberation is broader than that. And so that was something that was so inspiring and amazing and challenging for me in the conversations with people, was watching people who were trying to say, what does it mean to integrate this in my day-to-day life? If we're trying to do this, there's theory and there's practice. And if we can't snap our fingers and create a world without police, we can at least make sure that we're not the police in our family, in our business, in
I
our
know that's
schools, in
right.
our community, right? And so what does that look like? To look at our relationships, to look at how we're structuring business and our intimate relationships, and all of these sorts of things. And so that for me is really inspiring, because you can point to what a carceral mentality looks like, and the way in which it fills all of our lives, and how we can get a little more free by addressing all of it and building alternatives. And that, there is the thing you want to get rid of, and then there's the thing you want to build.
Absolutely.
And we often forget the thing we want to build. And even if we can't get rid of the thing we want to get rid of, we can still build. And in building, it makes it easier to get rid of the thing we want to get rid of.
Can render that obsolete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's the, oh, I didn't actually have to call the police because we have the services in place where this isn't happening, or we already knew who to call who could actually come in and interrupt harm. And that is the part that often gets ignored, that it's, that doesn't make headlines. And yet it's the part that people are really trying to figure out day in and day out. And it's the biggest challenge, because that's where we've all been, we've all been brought up in this system to believe that power is your ability to exact revenge upon people and to punish people, and not collective power to be able to protect each other and stand up with each other and heal together and build something together. That's not how we've defined power in the United States, especially. And so looking at that and looking at how powerful everyone was who really leaned into that and how vital that was, I think like that's the story of abolition we don't talk about enough.
Absolutely. The other part of that that sticks with me is folks in your stories don't seem obsessed with needing to make massive change. They seem deeply committed to making change in their sphere of influence. Are there a few examples from the book, or even ones you couldn't include, that you feel like really emulate this idea of? Because I really think about Mariam Kaba's A Million Experiments, and this idea that replacing this singular system that treats everyone with a one-size-fits-all response to harm, or even the potential of harm, is not replacing it with another singular system. It's actually replacing it with a million different ways that people can select or self-determine how they do the prevention, intervention, and healing work. Are there, what is a story or two that really stuck with you as you were developing this?
Yeah, I think that that is such an important thing. And I do think that's something where, like when I was in conversation with Il from Complex Movements, that they were really clear about.
Shout out to Detroit.
Right, absolutely. And, we had to include some Detroit workers, and there was no way we could skip Detroit in a book about a revolution. And, they were talking about how you can have the same problem, the same overarching evil, like hypercapitalism, white supremacy, and it will look different in all of the areas it touches down and all the ways it acts. But also you can have the same idea of freedom, or even the same concept around a movement, and it will look different in every place it's being enacted, because the needs of each community, the needs of how community is being impacted is all different. And so you can work together, you can find that, you can learn from each other, but you also have to be able to adapt and keep things hyper local. And I love the idea of that, of how we can actually see, this similar problem, and then not say, let me prescribe a solution for you, but instead say, let me stand in solidarity with you, support what you need in your space, and if you want advice, anything like that, I'm here. And that's so beautiful. And I feel almost like the book is a constellation of that as well. Like I hope people will look through that and say, oh, this is what this looks like in this community. And so even looking at things like when I was talking with Darnisha Weary about black coffee.
Which will
And
just be right up
in
the street
yeah,
soon.
Darnisha's here somewhere, right here.
Right here, shout out.
And even just simple things that she talked about, adjustments, and realizing like, oh, if you're going to be hiring high schoolers, uniforms actually aren't a great idea for a business. And why have kids feel stressed when they've already got to worry about sports clothes and school clothes and book bags, and like, why is that a thing stopping young people from having a job?
Absolutely.
You know, like, why wouldn't we adjust to the workforce that we want and what they need, right? And like something that's simple, like when we consider people going, oh, well, if you want the job, why though? Why? You know, what's the point in that?
Control.
Exactly. You know, and really, you know, prepping people for this really capitalist idea of don't question, just do what you have to do. And something that simple of, oh, this doesn't work for you? Okay. And we're not doing that, you know? But then looking at all how hyperlocal a lot of these, like Freedom Inc., and looking at the work that they've been doing in the Midwest, and like looking at how they were like, we are in these very specific communities, and their people's budget, I think, is such a beautiful example. And so if you read in the book, they talk about how at the same time that the city, I believe I think I'm trying to remember what city they're in. At the same time that the city that they're in releases their budget, they release a people's budget, which is the result of them going and surveying underrepresented communities in their area and asking them what their priorities are. And then they release the people's budget, and they release how they're going to spend their funds based on what the community said is a priority. And they do it at the same time, with their little area, to try to show the city what impact even a small org can make when you're
Yes.
listening to people and their priorities, right? And so instead of having these national conversations, and I, have a political science degree, I spent years listening to white dudes argue over which economic theory was better than what economic theory. And it's all, in this weird fake world they made up where, oh, I'm a Keynesian, no, oh, and it's none of it actually applies to how people live in the
They
world.
live in a theoretical world.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And that's why I swore I would never debate a white man again in my life, and I refuse. I already had to do it in college, and it was insufferable then, and I was only, in my 20s. So but it's beautiful to watch, saying, hey, when you listen to the people, like, you can come up with something that can make a measurable difference in the lives of people, and we can make more of a difference with this little budget
Yeah.
than this city can make with their millions and millions of dollars. And so that was such a beautiful example to me of, like, not only trying something different, but making it very transparent and using it not only to be effective and trying to make a difference in their area, but then trying to be an example for the broader area as well.
Yeah, and what I love about that is you're talking about like being descriptive and not like prescriptive. Because like here in Seattle, we have solidarity budget, and when the mayor releases his budget, they release a budget based on things that community-based organizations have identified and said, like, if the city really cared about us, here's what the budget would look like. And it's different. You got LA has their people's budget, New York has their people's budget. And I think what's dope about that is each area is able to take what aspect of that organizing tool, of that imagining a world that we want to live in, and make it work for the organizing and the work that they're doing in their space. And thinking about that, the world is in like such grave crisis. The world is always in crisis, and right now it's so visible and palpable as we think about Palestine and Congo and Sudan and all of the things that need to happen. The genocide of trans loved ones here on Turtle Island. How would you hope people look at this text and think about the ways they can engage in these larger struggles? Because I go to bed every night and I'm like, did I do enough?
Right.
Knowing that my tax dollars are being spent on weapons and war and genocide, did I do enough knowing that literally people in our communities, some have absolutely nowhere to go and will be criminalized that evening? And then I sit and I think about, yeah, like today I made sure 45 young people ate dinner. I made sure all of my staff had the resources that they need. We got young people housed. And by the end of these next 2 months, $65,000 will move into other people's families and homes. So yeah, we did something, right? But it's still, even in the midst of all that, too easy or maybe too hard, because sometimes it's our own like shame as opposed to our living in our hope of what we can do, that we go to bed in that place of like almost being defeated.
Right.
When folks read this, how do you hope that will inspire them to engage in some of these larger movements, but from the sphere of influence that they personally have?
I think you voiced so much that I think a lot of people go through. You voiced some things that I think are really specific to movement workers, right? Which is that feeling of like you're doing this and it's not enough, and how much is enough. Um, and then that feeling that I think everyone has, even just being like empathetic people, absorbing what's happening in the world and not even knowing where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And one, I would say it's important to recognize the cost of that, of the feeling that it's all on you, that it's never enough, that you have to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and that you exist to do this work, and that joy isn't a thing you can have, that a feeling of accomplishment isn't a thing you can have. The cost of that was really clear in so many of the conversations I had with people, of what it costs people. And that was something that was so clear for me when talking with people. There were so many times where I wanted to just wrap my arms around people and be like, what you're doing is so amazing. Like, you are so precious and beautiful and important to our communities. And I wanted to be like, I wanted to hold them the way they hold community, right? And recognizing that, I think that's something that you'll recognize as you read it. Like, you love these people. You're like, there's so much love in them.
Absolutely.
And I just want everyone to know that's doing the work, like, you're one of those people, right? And so that means like people want that for you the same, and you're as vital. And it's easy to forget that because we're always told that, if there is struggle to be had, that you show how much you care by how much you're willing to struggle. And any joy means that you don't care enough about it, or rest means that you're not, caring enough about it. But instead, it's an acknowledgement that you are part of the community you're fighting for, that you're trying to save, that you have that value.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was really important to me that I saw that was, I think, kept people hyper local, was when you're really connected to community and you're insisting on recognizing the value of every member of your community, then you can't dismiss the progress you make. You
Yeah.
can't dismiss, even if it's only one person, that person is everything. And you can't dismiss that. You can recognize the hurt and pain around every loss we have, because we will have losses, and that's real. But we also don't get to say we do this work because we care about community, but what we do for them isn't enough to matter. It has to matter. And that is the thing that I want people to see, is that there are reflections of everything you see on a national level happening in your town, in your school, in your neighborhood, even in your families. And you can make a difference there.
Yep.
And it absolutely matters on the same scale. It really does, because the breakdown of that, the breakdown of us recognizing that we care for each other, that we are in this together, is actually how we get to a genocide where people are saying, that's not my problem, that's not my fault, that has nothing to do with me. It's the breakdown of what happens in our neighborhoods,
Yeah.
in our towns. And I've noticed that, it's connected community that comes together and says, this matters. It's connected community that's going out to protest, because it's easier then to see how connected you are. And it's easier to keep yourself going because you know you're with community.
Yeah, and it's connected community that feeds each other and houses each other.
Exactly.
Intervenes when there are interpersonal issues.
Right.
I think about Mariam Kaba's quote that collective care is the antidote to violence, and that it's not about necessarily how big the scale of changes any individual makes. It is about, are we connected to each other, all actively engaging in the world that we want to live in, even if it's not present right now.
Right.
And there's something really beautiful about that at the end of the day that takes the pressure off the individual. It's not just me, it's not just you.
Yeah.
It's everyone in this room, everyone that's not in this room, everyone that is in another room doing, my little sphere of influence.
Right.
Right here.
And it matters. And we know it matters because it's the one thing that the powers that be are terrified of. Like, we forget that
Absolutely.
even the international politics has an individual aspect that has to be sold to us. Either ignorance has to be sold to us, hatred has to be sold to us, fear has to be sold to us in order for it to work. And that's all done on an interpersonal level, right? That's all messaging given to us that we're told to give to others. And us handing truth to each other, staying connected to each other, recognizing the voices of people who actually do have our best interests at heart because we know them, because they're in community with us, versus those who are pretending to. All of that is a real threat to the powers that be because they can't approximate that. They can't fake that. And that's why things like our social media posts are being challenged and watched and people are being kicked
Yep.
out for that. That's why they're trying to fire people for saying they don't want a genocide, because it's not because that's absurd, it's because they actually know it's not. And
Right.
saying that very basic truth that genocide is bad is a real threat to all of this effort that's being put out there. And so I think it's easy to forget that every single national and international harm that we see actually starts and is in these very local ways, in these very individual ways, where they have to tell us a story and get us to believe it in order to be able to do it. None of this works without us. And so recognizing that we actually have that power ourselves to counter that, and it is more authentic and it is actually easier for us to build when we can do that healing work of reconnecting with each other, is really, really important.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about, like, in our space at Creative Justice, our goal is how do we not create narratives that are not the ones young people choose for themselves? And the liberation you feel when you have freedom from fear, freedom from shame, freedom from guilt, to get to try to pursue who it is that you want to be, or to take time to get to know yourself. Because for so many young people, they don't have time, space to, I don't know, just sit and be and make art and be connected to other people. And so switching gears a little bit, something I was wondering when I was thinking about this conversation was, I was like, how did Ijeoma get to be this incredible author? Like, there is someone that existed before we knew you as who you are now. How did you arrive at this place?
You know, I think part of it for me is it was organic in a way and weird. I mean, little kid me wanted to be a writer more than anything in the world. Absolutely. I read, even before I could read, I would just hold books and blabber nonsense. And my mom has all of my like first grade stories that I would write, you know, laminated and saved. And then by the time I was like in fifth grade, the thought of being a writer was gone because I was a Black girl in a really, really poor family. And I was the oldest child, and I was going to get a job that paid bills. I wasn't going to be creative.
Because writing doesn't pay
Writing doesn't
bills.
pay bills. And, you know, I am fortunate enough now that it does. But don't get into writing if you want to be rich. Like,
Wait, what? New York
yeah.
Times bestseller? Not rich?
But it's, you know, yeah, it's an industry like, you know, like ask someone, did you get into music to be rich? And then look at those record contracts and you'll see. Books are really similar, in fact, as far as how percentages and everything work. But I loved writing and I put it aside, and, you know, I didn't start writing professionally until I was in my 30s.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so I got hope.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
look, I wasn't, you know, you brought it up, so that this is your fault. Because I wasn't going to say, I need a book from you. I want a book from you, because I hate it when people like publicly pressure people into things, but you put it out here in the world. And I'll say
I did.
that every time I hear you speak, the amount of beauty in your words, the way that you just shoot that arrow right into the heart of the topic, it changes people. And I want a book from you. I want anything written from you. I want a restaurant menu written by you. I want anything.
I got you. Will you settle for a coffee menu? There's
Yeah.
one right up the street at Washington
Yes.
Hall, the Creative Cafe. No, I appreciate that.
But you know, and we will talk at any time that you want to. But if you want any support around that, absolutely, like anything I can do to make that happen, because the world would be a better place if it's right for you and when it's right for you. So I'm just putting that out there now.
I'll put it in my back pocket right now.
Yes, because it's 100% sincerity. I mean this. I was just thinking about that when we were in Olympia, and I was listening to you talk, and I was like, I just want to dive into this deeper. I want to be able to thumb through these words. And so for me, though, writing was a real, like, a necessity. It was, Trayvon Martin was murdered, and I thought I was going to go crazy, and I'm not exaggerating. Like,
Yeah.
I really thought, living in the Pacific Northwest, this collective gaslighting of a place that was like, oh, that's so sad. Aren't you glad you don't live in Florida? You know? And it just like,
And you're like, but we live here.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's rough here.
exactly. And it was killing me. And I
Yeah.
was trying to find a way to discuss it. And so that's where my writing started. And then people started responding to it. And it was really funny because I had no idea what I was doing. And so I started like making charts. I would write a post, people would say, I like this, and they would say what, they liked about it, and I would like write it down in a chart to try to figure out what my voice was because I had no idea. I had
Mm.
never, I hadn't been in classes that were like, this is your voice, this is a particular style. I was writing the way I talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was just trying to figure out what is it about this that's appealing because people would be like, I really like that. And I'm like, really? What exactly? What sentence? Was it this? Was it this part? And trying to figure it out. And I was
Mm-hmm.
literally keeping like a diagram for a long time.
I want to see this diagram now. I'm like imagining it on
Yeah.
your wall.
Yeah, it was just like, it was a very specific, like neurodiverse, how do people work type thing that I did. And it actually, helped me kind of understand what it was because there is a lot of that feeling of like, do I have the right to be here? I don't have a journalism or English degree. People are saying, what are you doing? And recognizing the uniqueness of my voice and what it was that was appealing to people. And then, making my own personal rules for myself about how I wanted to be heard, what impact I wanted to have really helped. And just trying to learn, like I really like approached writing of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I have a natural talent in here, obviously, because I don't know what I'm doing, and yet people are responding.
Yeah.
And so, how can I honor that and nurture that and grow that in a way that serves? And so, finding my own space and getting confidence in that, luckily, I was able to figure out that part of what people responded to was that I was authentic, I was myself, because I didn't actually have all these things. And so, that was something I've guarded. That's something I've guarded really, really. If I get edits back for an article and it doesn't sound like me, like we're gonna argue or I'm gonna pull the piece. Like that's been the rule I've had my whole career. And so yeah, that's where that kind of started. And I was writing and writing and writing while also working a really awful job.
What was it? Can I ask?
Yeah, I was working marketing for the auto industry. And not even like a cool, I don't know if there is a cool brand, but not a cool brand. And so I was helping to sell trucks.
Totally.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great use of my skills as a creative person. So a little side story that has nothing to do with this. This is the type of place I worked in. So one day I walked in, I was the only Black woman in the whole building.
The story has already started out like a horror movie.
And the only woman in my entire department. And I had been gone a couple of days because I had started writing on the side, and they didn't know because none of them would read, the Times or MSNBC. And I would literally go on MSNBC. I would say I'm working from home, fly to New York, go on MSNBC, fly home. No one knew.
Oh, that's a
no
grind.
one was watching it. And I had been gone a couple of days. I came back, and we were working in this we'd run out of space. We were in this portable trailer. So it was a small space, and it was me and 3 guys. And I walk in, and I can't get into my desk because there's these giant golf umbrellas, like the big,
At
6-footers,
your desk?
on the floor, 2 of them taking up the whole floor. And I'm like, guys, what's happening here? And one guy's like, it's his fault. And he points to this other guy. And he's like, I didn't know. And I'm like, what? It's happening. Why can't I get to my desk? And he's like, I didn't know you're not supposed to open them indoors. It's bad luck. And I'm like,
okay.
So when did this happen? And they're like, 2 days ago. And I'm like, what? And so I walk up and I pick up the umbrellas and they're like, what? And I close them and they're like, she's not afraid of anything. And I'm like, I'm afraid of a lot of things, not these umbrellas. And I folded them up, worked the rest of my day selling trucks, went on Facebook, friends only, complained y'all won't even believe this. And one of my friends was like, Ijeoma, you have to quit that job.
Yes.
And it was a week later that I quit that job. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just writing more, and I was actually, just being honest in this space. And then I had this other space for 10 hours a day where it was just surrounded by these guys and
The umbrella guys.
the umbrella guys. And I was going to get fired if I didn't quit. So I quit, and I had no savings, no plan, um, and almost lost my house, absolutely lost my car
Oh my
right away.
goodness.
Because when you're writing essays and you're starting out, like, we're talking $100 an essay,
If that.
if that. That's so many essays.
They're
Y'all.
like, we'll buy you dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, cool, I have a mortgage. So, and then so then I'm writing everywhere, right? So it's building a career because people are like, oh, we're seeing you everywhere. I'm like, well, you better, because I have to pay these bills. And then I got my book deal. And so when I got my book deal, first thing I want to talk about race and my little modest advance. I paid 4 months of back mortgage,
Wow.
saved my house, and then bought a cheaply used Honda so that we could drive again.
Yeah.
And the rest is history, and like built from there. But it was a real leap. Like it was a real, I don't know. And it was, for someone who was raised, as a Black woman, to always put everyone else first, like it felt like the most selfish and yet inescapable thing in the world for me to be like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to write, and I can't be in this space anymore. But it was one of the absolute best decisions I've ever made. And I always remember that because I think of how every time I'm interviewing people and I'm asking them about the work they do, so often the work they're doing is dictated by circumstance and not by their passion, not by even by their greatest talents and what drives them. And I think about how many Black people in this world especially,
Yeah.
like what we could do if we were able to. And I'm so glad that that leap paid off because, I think I'm much better suited to this work than selling trucks.
I don't know. I would have bought a truck from you. I just want to say that's a beautiful place for us to transition to some audience Q&A. The thing that sticks with me most from that story you just shared, one, the end, like just imagining a world where people get to exist in their gifts and their talents and their passions, and just like how different the world would be. But also you saying that when you would be sent back your article and it wasn't in your voice, that you would push back. And I feel like I see that in how you engage the world, that if you are not being able to be engaged authentically, you push back. And that inspires me. I know it inspires so many other people. And thank you for the ways in which you live authentically, because it empowers the rest of us to do the same.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we don't have a lot of time for audience Q&A, so keep it a question. You feel me? But we're going to open up the floor with a show of hands if you got a question.
So I don't actually have a question. I, I read So You Want to Talk About Race, and I just wanted to thank you for writing that because it gave me language to kind of grapple with the topic and have conversations about that, about something so crucial. So thank you for writing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, I'll let that one slide. Thank you for the love.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. I was wondering, so I work in social services, and I always feel like any aspect where you work with people is exhausting. Can revolutionary work be exhausting at some point? Either working for, against, around people, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think that part of that is something that we actually need to address, which is, this idea that we are all like to be monitored to this work is a white supremacist idea in itself, right? That this system that we're already disempowered in, that like white people can learn about us, read about us, clap for us, and then we're the ones dying to do the work and tearing ourselves apart for it. is inherently white supremacist, and it devalues our healing, and that's the one aspect that like other people can't do for us. Um, there's a lot of work that like white people and people with different privileges can be doing right now and should be doing, but they actually can't heal us. And part of what can be really, really hard, and I think you'll recognize this deeply as well, is we are traumatized people doing work that keeps us steeped directly in that trauma.
Yep.
And that's really tough. And it's tough personally, but it also means like it's tough socially. And for many years, like my personal solution was to isolate myself a lot. And it worked in the sense that people were like, wow, I never see your name in drama. And I'm like, that's because you never see me. But there's that aspect of community connection and accountability that you can't just, you can't do it all without that connection. And so learning about that as I get older and saying, okay, we have to find ways to prioritize healing. And that means I personally have to model that as well, right? In my work. And so part of like that's really important, I think, is for those of us doing this work, especially if we're doing it visibly, and people, whether that's, a room watching you or a world watching you, is to be whole people.
Yeah.
In the spaces we're in. And that's something I'm trying so hard to try to do and cling to. And that's why you're always gonna see like my makeup posts, you're gonna see my goofy posts, you're gonna hear about like all this stuff, because I need people to understand that you have to be a whole person in this work. And so, yeah, that's really hard, and prioritizing that can be so hard, but we have to do it. And in fact, I would say it's not only important because it keeps us doing this work, but it actually sends a strong message about our value to the world and the systems that be, that we are of such value that even while we're doing this work, we know that we deserve care and we deserve to try to thrive.
Yeah. And if I could just add one thing, I think there's encouraging each other to be whole people. Like, that's what I love about my friendship with Gabriel is, I'm sitting here like, I don't have time to make music. I gotta run this organization and raise money. He's like, here's a beat, write something. And there is the aspect of it is our individual healing. And there's also the ways in which we say to each other, actually, fam, like you could take a day and make some music and have some joy in your life and be a whole person, and like literally the work is going to be there tomorrow. Like you're not going to abolish the police today.
Right. 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 And that, I tell you, being married to Gabriel, it's that, yeah, he's very good at like pulling you away, being like, come be a person.
I love that.
Which I deeply appreciate.
Hi. Right behind you.
Oh, hi.
So it really resonated with me when you were talking about like kind of being on the brink of feeling like you're gonna lose it. I worked in nonprofits for the past 13-ish years, and I'm kind of in this place right now where there's a lot of well-intentioned people around me that are worried about how much I'm worried about. And like, well, do something about it. And so my question is, what would you say or do with people who are worried about how much you're worried about, but not necessarily being active, or people who are actively engaging in lateral violence because they don't see the interconnectedness of our struggles?
Right. Yeah. I'll say, first of all, that absolutely sounds like working in a nonprofit, especially as BIPOCs, especially for Black people, like the way in which people kind of fetishize how much deeper it hits you, and that it isn't this kind of eat, pray, love journey that you're on. And I feel that, and that's real. And I would say, for me personally, I think like what's really been vital for me is to be clear about the rules of engagement with me, of like that what a relationship is. I think that we are often so conditioned to carry all of the burden of everything that doesn't fit in our relationships, work relationships, personal relationships, where it's like, oh, you don't get that, so I'm gonna carry the burden of what you don't get. oh, you're not really in here with me, so I'm going to try harder to make up for the fact that you don't really feel like you have any skin in this game. You know, oh, you're going to get all the pleasure from this and I'm not because I'm still working, but I'm going to keep pushing through. And for me, being upfront from the beginning and saying, like, oh, working with me, being in relationship with me, even in this professional capacity, means this. And if you want the benefit of my presence, if you want to look good on your brochures by having it look diverse and all of that stuff, if you want to be able to turn to someone with lived expertise in this, that the cost is this.
Yeah.
The cost is you show up in this way. The cost is you dedicate some time to your own learning. The cost is that you believe me when I say that this is an issue and you don't actually, it doesn't actually have to compute with you for it to be valid. And talking about, and this is what we'll do when it isn't working, you know. A lot of what I try to do with that is I find, and this is something I talked about a bit in my book, you know, the war on imagination is real. And I think that we have a better idea of what relationships look like outside of the status quo because a lot of our relationships have to be outside of the status quo. And it's important to remember that even like so often white people who envision themselves the most revolutionary have no concept of relationship outside of the status quo. And that deeply impacts movement work. And one thing that I try to do as a generosity is offer that vision. And so taking time and saying, if this worked the way I needed it to be, if I showed up every day, seen, heard in a truly intersectional space, a truly caring space, what would it look like? How would everyone act? And offer that. Because I think it's hard to remember how little people who've never had to actually work outside of systems know about how to build outside of systems. And so saying, this is the vision I have, and this is a space I see that you could be in. Can you see it with me? Sometimes that alone can make a huge shift because people just didn't envision it. And then that fear comes in, right? Because there's that fear of you're angry, you're upset, and I'm not going to fix it and I might make it worse. So what if I proactively acted to rid myself of this? You know, what if I weaponized this? What if I got preemptively angry at you because I already feel my failure in this? All of these things that we have to go through over and over again. And it's all simply just like lack of imagination, lack of vision for what could be built. And so that has been a thing for me that I had to realize in my personal relationships, in my professional relationships, is how often those who are quote unquote served by our systems are done a disservice by being told, no need to imagine anything better than this. It's fine. And then even people who recognize something's wrong still work from this point of, I couldn't come up with something better than this. And that's how we end up with these really stagnant movement spaces and people who get really uncomfortable with people who see more of it or, you know, have had to see outside of it. So that's the advice I have to give.
And for like some of our, you know, thing about white folks in movement, and often them gravitating towards the status quo, I hear that as transactionary. Like, what can I get from you from what you give to me, as opposed to like, I don't know, like doing your work to expand that. Or when someone is offering you the possibilities of what a space could be like, instead of giving the 12 reasons why it couldn't be, why not now spend your energy in the many reasons why it could be? That's why I love my staff at Creative Justice. They don't have no problem telling me, actually, Nikita, it could be this. And I appreciate that.
Right.
So if you are a nonprofit administrator, if you are a white person in movement and you have folks offering you possibilities, instead of engaging all the reasons why that possibility can't exist, your work is to challenge internally and fight for the reasons why it could.
Right. And recognize that you can grow. Like, that's the thing, right? Like, I think for those of us who grew up in areas like this, who grew up surrounded by whiteness, like, white people, you can't fool me. I know what you're capable of. Like, I do. And so this idea, like, that's sold, this pessimistic idea of, like, this real fragility that's nurtured. I mean, like, we literally have laws being passed in the country so that white people don't have to feel uncomfortable with history. This, like, think about how little, you have to think of white people to think that learning history would kill you. That being uncomfortable for a day, you would just fall apart. Like, that is so deeply pessimistic. That's so like, I'm like, I don't know. I've seen you do some things. I have some white friends. Um, I have faith that people can grow and people can change and people can be challenged. And so recognizing that, like that there's a core pessimism when you hear an idea that challenges you and you say it can't be done. Like that's a core pessimism you have about yourself
Yeah.
and the people you're working with that you need to challenge if you're going to grow out of this, because you've been fed a story about your own limitations when it comes to acknowledging harm, growing past harm, healing, all of that.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you for just like sitting with us. I love that I got to hear some personal stories. Although if you follow Ijeoma online, you will hear all the personal stories. She's not playing on the authenticity. And if you bought a book, get it signed. If you didn't buy a book, buy a book. And maybe buy two, give one to someone.
Yeah.
As this is an incredible opportunity to get to read about the descriptive ways other folks are changing the world, being a revolution in and of themselves, and maybe you'll discover something for you to be doing as well. So thank you, y'all. I know we're gonna have a book signing. I think it's down here, and you're gonna get instructions from the wonderful Ebony.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Give it up for Nikita and Ijeoma. Yes. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for this conversation. An innovation.